Welcome to Conversations. My guest today is Tobias Glidden, who is a candidate for state representative from Nantucket, who has come to Falmouth just to talk about his interest in that position. Welcome to the studio and welcome to Falmouth.
Thank you very much for having me, Barbara.
I suppose the first thing we want to find out is why you want to be a state rep.
Well, I got into it because I guess to answer that question, it started off why I wanted to become a selectman. And for me, it was really about trying to think about the bigger problems we're facing as a society that we're all talking about right now, and how can Nantucket as an island kind of have that impact with all the people who come to the island. And if we can do a good job on our island, then that can spread to other places from all the tourists and professionals who come to the island. And the opportunity to run for state representative came up, and a number of people approached me and said I'd be good in my temperament and the way I approach problems. And so I was like, this is a great opportunity to continue to help the local people in our community. And this kind of my background as a stonemason contributed to me really believing that we just need everyday people in politics. And so,
So you were very recently a selectman in Nantucket.
Yep, I was the youngest ever elected at 24 years old, and I finished up in April. Mid-April was the end of my term, so I served for 3 years, and on Nantucket we have a five-member board.
Oh, I see. I see. And as a selectman, you got to meet other selectmen and other selectmen and men and women in other towns, and also, did you have any connection with the Statehouse?
Yeah, so I was very, I think a lot of people think of a selectman being just focusing on those local issues. And for me to really be effective and to be at scale, I always was trying to think, well, what can we do outside of Nantucket that's going to have an impact on us? So, I attended the Cape Cod and Island Selectmen Association meetings that a lot of my other selectmen didn't attend because they're on the mainland. I went up to Beacon Hill and testified on behalf of a number of energy bills, particularly wind energy bills that had to do with kind of what the vineyard was doing. But sea level rise is going to have an impact on Nantucket, and so as a town father, I felt responsible for making sure I was doing everything possible to be engaged in that issue of renewable energy and climate change. I also got engaged in another issue regarding small mesh fishing. So we're seeing kind of a lot of really intense fishing on the two islands, and it was an issue that was very complex. And us just sending letters as a selectman up to the Statehouse wasn't doing anything. So I got really engaged in that issue and ended up going to a bunch of council meetings that NOAA oversees to kind of advocate on the behalf of the people who own a fishing rod, who don't have the opportunity to go out and catch a fish anymore because there's so much commercial pressure.
I suspect you have a keen interest in fishing, given your family background.
Yeah, definitely. We've had a fish market since the 1880s on the island, one of the oldest businesses on the island. So it's something that grew up in my heritage, and my grandfather talked about, and I'm always hearing stories about how things used to be. But I think now I've really seen, growing up, from 10, I probably started working there packing chowder, and I've really seen the fishery decline, and decline as in being part of our economy and our heritage. And I think it's really important for someone like me with that background of working with fishermen, of going out scalloping in Nantucket Bay. I was up in North Falmouth today, and there's not scallops. There used to be scallops in the bay there. And I think having my background and understanding fishermen and understanding homeowners and the conflicts with nitrogen, and trying to remember that culture really contributes to having a beautiful society on the Cape and the islands.
Yes. And you're a fourth generation a Nantucketer?
I think we've had the business. I'll be the fifth generation in the fish market business. And then we've been around for about 7 generations.
I see.
Somewhere in there.
Yeah, but you've earned a living as a stonemason.
Yep. So, when I moved back to Nantucket about 5 years ago, I really wanted to. I've always been engaged with my hands, and I wanted to do something outside. And I got the opportunity to start working with a stonemason, an old Irish guy by the name of Henry Varian, and I was just really excited about. You have to know physics and chemistry.
Yes.
And art, and also talking to people, and it was just such a great opportunity to be outside, and I still love doing it, and it really transitions to politics very well because, or government in general, like when you're building a chimney, it's built up of thousands of bricks, but you have to lay one at a time. And so you need to make sure all the people who are helping you, your tenders, are bringing you your mortar and bringing your bricks, are placing them just where they need to be. And so as the mason, I'm laying the bricks and I'm conducting, making sure everybody's helping me. And I think that really transitions into how our society works. We need to make sure we're, as a whole society, helping those who need help, helping us.
Yes, that is a wonderful metaphor for accomplishment. And I have to tell you about my favorite Greek proverb. Bean by bean, or we can say stone by stone, the bag gets full. But it's brick by brick, isn't it?
Yeah.
Right. Now, I know that you're a local boy, but you've done some traveling.
Yeah. So when I graduated, so I'm 28 now, and I graduated in 2007. And that summer was, kind of when the financial crisis happened. And so I, took a year off from school, university, and I biked across Europe. I biked from, France through Belgium, through the Netherlands, through Germany, up to Denmark. And, my mentality was, the economy is in a really bad state. It doesn't make sense to, try to engage in the workforce. Right. Let's try to see the world. Right. And I think so much for young people and people in general, like we have so much in common as humans, and as a young person, you're going to be spending the rest of your life living. And if you don't know how other people live, you're not going to be able to live your life as fully as you'd like to. And so seeing how people, I also traveled to Africa, Tanzania, and Kenya, Central America. I did some community projects there. I've traveled all across America. And I think it's just important to see how people live. I took a bus ride for 4 days from San Francisco to Boston. And it was one of the most memorable experiences of my life. Seeing people in small town America and what they're going through, and just sitting on a bus and being able to talk to people about their lives. And you just gain so much compassion for humanity through that experience, and that really helped. Traveling really helped me think about not just how I help my community, but how my community Nantucket's interacted with the history of the whole world through whaling, and how do we continue to do that? And I'm always thinking about that in my policy.
I suspect that what you've just said would make me think that if I asked you what you think is the role of government, I think you would probably answer.
I think the role of government is to help people.
Help people, yes.
Is to help people. Right. It's very simple. I think we get there's a lot of media that doesn't focus on helping people, and every time someone talks to you about politics and it's not about helping people, I'll give you an example. When I was on the Board of Selectmen, people go, oh, you must have people coming to you all the time and complaining about things, and everybody's got a little issue, or this pothole needs to be fixed, and that. And I would always tell people, don't come to me to complain. Come to me with a solution. And so what that strategy did was it got people thinking about what the solution was. If it's a pothole, it needs to be fixed. How much is it going to cost to fix it? And why it should be fixed versus other ones. And so then they get engaged in understanding that it's a process. And I'm not just a sounding board. and then we get the problems fixed. And I direct them to the person to talk to. But starting out your engagement with your society as a government saying, we're here to help, helps citizens get engaged in that government.
Oh, yeah, and that's so important, having citizens become engaged. And certainly those problems there are many, and I think you see that Falmouth has problems that are similar to those in Nantucket. I like the phrase that you used in writing to I think it was the Vineyard Gazette, that Falmouth has to face when the reality, when the road ends, the reality is there.
Yeah, and so so we have 2 islands in the district, and we have Falmouth. So I think what the whole district faces is very similar issues. I know from water quality, opiates, affordable housing, mental health, senior care. We're going to have 33% of our population in the district over the next 10 years are going to be seniors, and that's only going up. And we don't have young people staying here, so we're looking at a problem that we can't quite see, but we're going to have a problem with how do we take care of seniors in our community as people live longer and there's less young people around. So how do we deal with that as a community? And we all face that.
Yes, and certainly there are issues of sea rise that you must be keenly aware of.
Yeah. So that's like, climate change is such a big one, and I think locally we need to understand that how that manifests with us is sea level rise and ocean acidification. So it's going to have an impact on all the shellfish, and as a mason, the calcium carbonate forming in the shell of that little scallop or that clam, it can't form under a more acidic condition when it's microscopically small. So that's going to have an impact on how much shellfish we catch. As the sea level rises, it's going to cost us a huge amount of money to protect our towns. And as a young person, it's been very discouraging to see what the response has been over the last 20 years to that issue. But the only way to live is to be optimistic. Humans have overcome greater challenges, and I think if we have a great opportunity through wind and solar. We're tiny. The Woods Hole in Falmouth is a tiny location. You only need a electric car with 100-mile-an-hour, 100-mile range, and then you're in control of your own future. You're not buying electricity from someone else. And I think that's what really excites me, is the solution is empowering people to have control over their energy future.
So you think that those of us on Cape Cod can become leaders, leading the way for others to become more resilient,
I think
more concerned about renewable energy.
Yeah, and I think constantly in our society we want our government, at the national level or the state level, to say here's the solution, and these other people are going to pay for it, and this is going to deal with climate change. But how America works is you have a town that has an idea, and they adopt that idea, and they bring it to fruition, and it works, and then they spread that to another town, and then that whole district takes hold of that idea, and then they bring it to the state, and they spread that to other districts, and the state adopts that, and then the federal government adopts it. How we work in our country is the bottom up, and so my constant focus is, how do I stay connected to the bottom? How do I stay connected to those working class people? How do I help them get affordable housing so they have time to deal with climate change? How do I engage with them to deal with this issue? Because we have to deal with it. And we cannot be bickering about what the best solution is. We all have to be making changes in our lifestyles to get to where we need to be, because retreating is not an option. From, Woods Hole is talking about moving to New Bedford.
Yes, when you spoke about work at the local level, ordinary people working together, it reminded me of what our water quality committee has been doing here in Falmouth to clean up the estuaries. So I think that as a model for what can be done and what others can do in other communities. So
Yeah,
you're,
so
you're
like
right, it's
on-
replicating
Yeah.
successful
Yeah,
attempts by
yeah.
others.
So a great example of that is we passed in 2006 a best management practices for fertilizers.
Yes.
The vineyard just adopted those 2 years ago,
Right.
and I know there's been talk about them, and they were, very well respected across the state. We've spent a lot of time into it. The land bank, we drafted
Yes.
that back in
Yes.
1974.
Right.
How many communities across Massachusetts
Right,
have benefited that? The question for me is, what's our affordable housing policy going to be next? We just got a tiny house article passed on Nantucket.
Good.
What community is going to adopt that next? What's going to be our next idea that we adopt in Falmouth that gets spread to the rest of the Cape and the rest of the state?
Yeah. You have reason to be optimistic, and it's nice that you're spreading that optimism. What do you do about this constant disagreements, issues that even in science we have scientists taking opposite views of an issue? How do you deal with that? It comes up all the time in
So
for selectmen.
I can answer that. How many people are you helping? When you're talking to a scientist and he says, well, here's this is how this plays out. Or you're talking to a businessman and he's saying, well, this is the impact on workers going to be. What scientist or businessman or local official is helping the most people? Think about that. Always try to help as many people as possible. And then stop bickering about the minute details. Are you helping people? Just for me, just constantly asking that question, I was raised Baptist, and we were always focused on how we can help people. Altruism is, I think, an important thing in humanity, and that's just how I approach that.
I see. Sort of the greatest good for the greatest number.
Yeah. And growing up in an island or at the end of the road in Falmouth, you come together as a community, and that benefits everybody.
Right. And I understand that you are a curious reader. That probably helps you come to understanding some of the issues. And they're very serious issues that we face.
Yeah, I was, we were talking about this earlier, but I was reading an article about how the only thing that enables one to be open-minded and to not get entrenched in a view is curiosity. It's not wealth, it's not education, it's curiosity. And how that kind of plays into my own reading and experiences. I was homeschooled. My mom raised all 6 of us, and she has a background in microbiology, and so she's a very smart ticket. And what we learned was how to learn. I don't want to go tell anybody. People are like, oh, what classes you take, or what do you do this? I learned how to learn. I did math problems, and I read, and I did science experiments, and engaged with my community. But I learned how to learn, and I think we need to be. We might talk about education later, but that's always what we need to be doing, is learning how to learn as young people, so that the rest of our lives. You were talking earlier before the show about how you used to be a teacher. Did you ever think you would be interviewing, a candidate for state representative? You learned this.
Yes, and that notion of knowing how to learn will keep us all abreast of the fantastic changes that are still ahead.
Yeah, and as like a selectman, we'd have a 600-page packet, and we've got 24 different departments, 11 different unions, $100 million budget, insurance policies, like all this complex system, and you just got to read through. You just got to start reading and being like, what does that mean? Or what is eminent domain, and what's the policy behind that? What's the history? And just be curious. And going through that history of being a selectman and engaging with those issues, I think really helps me going forward.
So you've had quite an education then, and you're looking forward to more of the same.
Yeah. People tell me, or ask me where I went to school, and I said, I went to University of Concordia for a time. I didn't graduate there, but my real education was was being a member of the Board of Selectmen, being engaged in my community with all those complex issues, and meantime trying to work with board members, some I agreed with, some I didn't disagree with, and getting prepared, and that helped prepare me for running for state representative and, negotiating with people and trying to get people engaged.
We are speaking about education. Certainly, one of the big issues that voters are facing is this whether or not we should allow an increase in charter schools. Have you got some thoughts about that?
Yeah, so I got some thoughts, and some people aren't necessarily going to like it, but I'm against the charter school bill, and the reason why is I think we need to think about where we're going long term in our education. In 20 years, I think if we continue on this path of charter schools, what will we see is that those who have a learning disability, or language disability, or a physical disability will be left out and left behind. And what we need to be doing is making sure we're funding all of our schools across the state properly. I know in Providence they spend about $30,000 per student. On Nantucket they spend 20, on the Vineyard they spend 25, in Western Mass they spend 12. Why is that unequal? Every kid in Massachusetts should have opportunity to have a good education. And I think it's really distressing. Up at the Statehouse, we have this whole policy, oh, no new taxes. Well, these are our kids. We should be funding to make sure that our next generation has great opportunities. And to go into it a little further, I think we should look at countries that are doing great in education. In Finland, I was reading an article in the Atlantic a couple weeks ago about how, there's no testing till middle school, not a single test, no homework. They're teaching kids how to learn, how to get excited, and I coached soccer for a number of years, and I teach at a lighthouse school as a substitute teacher, and I've done a couple little miniature architecture classes where I show little kids how to build things out of little stones or twigs and talk about nature and how to engage with it. But kids are super curious. They want to learn. And I think what we need to do as a state is enable them to learn. And through all of our, regulations and through all our mandatory testing and all this framework, we're not helping kids. And I think we need to come together as a community first and say, we want what's really best for our kids. And we want all our kids to be equal. We want them all to have an equal opportunity. Why does some kid get a better opportunity than another? And that is the fundamental when you talk to educators in Finland. It's equality.
Yes.
It's the important foundation of producing good education. So I'm against I understand that charter schools, some of them have done some good, but we should be achieving that good through public schools.
Yes, in education, that gap between in achievement is so central. So that it's interesting that your focus on having everyone learn how to learn is probably trumps having just information or a curriculum.
We have a curriculum, and it's set up by a large corporation that writes these curriculums. You can probably speak to this better than I can, Barbara. Correct me if I'm wrong, but what we want to be doing, and I personally think that we have an education system that teaches kids like it was 1940. This is 2016.
Yes.
Every single young person I know who gets a job, they don't necessarily know what they're doing. They learn on the job. They have good morals. They have good learning skills. They have good organizational skills. They have good communication skills. They have good networking skills.
Right.
And then they learn their job. That's how it should be. And so the fact that we're trying to teach kids facts and make sure they're getting these certain, they understand this and then this and then this, is getting away from making sure you're really engaged in learning how to learn, and that you really kids are passionate about doing that, and they'll just gobble it up.
Yes. Your thinking is, you're not alone in thinking that there's a lot of discussion now about rethinking the way we educate children.
Yeah.
And so many of your ideas are being talked about too, so we will be interested in seeing what happens.
Yeah. My mom teaches at a Waldorf school, so I've been, she
Yes.
teaches math and science, so I've been engaged in a Waldorf school on the island, and that model is one I think that doesn't work for everybody, but it teaches kids how to learn.
Now let's talk about what happens at the Statehouse among representatives. I know politics is often described as the art of the compromise. What is your thought about working with others?
So on the Board of Selectmen, I engaged with people who had very different political views than I did. And some of those folks were the people, like one of the selectmen on Nantucket was a very conservatively minded. And we found some similar concerns about water quality. We disagreed on a lot of other issues, but on water quality, we were leading the discussion about how to protect our water. And that was so important to me. It's like, find issues that you can work with people on and get them done. And I think that's how I always operate. So much of being a state representative is learning. So no matter who you are, what your experience is, and Tim Madden, the current representative who's stepping down, will tell you this is learning. You have to learn how the job works and learning how to work with people. And for me, my experience on the Board of Selectmen, engaging with people of different views, and then getting people who I call the shareholders, the voters and the taxpayers, getting the shareholders to engage with the board members to tell the CEO, the town manager, what to do. The same idea.
Right. Well, that makes a lot of sense.
Yeah. And I'm running as an independent.
Yes.
And I'm going to enroll as a Democrat if I get elected. And part of the reason why I'm doing that is because I really think that the vote, the opinions of the people should come first, and what people really need, instead of focusing on a party. I really think we need to be looking out for people. Right. And I think we've heard a lot about that in general in this election.
Well, we only have a few minutes left, but will you tell our viewers what they can expect on the general ballot in November?
So on the general ballot, it'll say, Tobias Glidden for representative in general court, and there'll be 2 names, and one will be a Democrat and one will be independent. And I'd encourage voters to, vote for me, vote for someone who's been a tradesman growing up, a craftsman, and who's really engaged in the issues that face our community. I understand the different nitrogen isotopes that are affecting our water quality. I've drafted 2 different articles at town meeting that affect affordable housing, a tiny house article and a housing bank article. I've spoken on behalf of energy policy, and I've passed a community choice aggregate on Nantucket that enables the whole community to purchase electricity at a cheaper rate and buy more renewables. And so I'd encourage people to go vote for a local person who wants to represent them.
Very good, and I want to thank you so much for coming to Falmouth and telling us about this, and I wish you well. And I want to thank viewers very much for tuning in, and I hope that you will tune in to Conversations next time. Thank you very much.
Great.
And thank you very much. What a very nice